Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to the Morning Devo with Beau. Hope you guys are well today. Enjoying the day. And what is it? It's May 14th. And we are going to be in Genesis 2021 today through our devotion. And I know, kind of when you're going through Genesis, some of these chapters kind of the devotion goes a little long for sure. So they're always, archived on my YouTube channel. So you could always go to Beau Willette. The spelling is right. Let's see, right there. And it's a lot of vowels, but you can go to YouTube, go to the search bar, type in the name, and get there. And if you go to the Live Now kind of tab, then you'll be able to get the latest, ones, or you can just click, the book of Genesis in the playlist and go through it as well. So let's get into it. Let's just get right into Genesis 2021. Hope you guys are jamming, doing okay. It's been a great morning. I'm up early, so I'm already at the gym, by the time I do my devotions, I've kind of already have listened to a devotion myself, meaning I've always gone through Word for Today with Chuck Smith for the past, 36 years. So I'm kind of, I just do the same thing. I listen to him and what he's going through, are going through, or what they're airing. Of course, he's gone on to his reward, but that's kind of what I do. And then, I get ready for the devotion. So here we go. Let's do it. Let's get in. It says, Abraham moved south to the Negev and lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur. And then he moved on to Gerar. While living there as a foreigner, Abraham introduced his wife Sarah by saying, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought him at his palace. Now this sounds very much like the Egyptian event that took place a few chapters ago. Abraham seems to have this consistent fear for his life when it comes to his wife. Remember, his wife was gorgeous, beautiful, absolutely stunning. There is a lot of things to talk about when you talk about Abraham and his kind of this insecurity that he has about his wife. I think a lot of guys have an insecurity about their wives, meaning maybe their wives are pretty and they don't feel like they deserve a pretty girl and they can be insecure. There's a lot of things that could go astray in us as men when it comes to pretty women. Sometimes we don't know how to act. Again, we get insecure, we get scared, we don't, and Abraham consistently has done this now, where he lies about who she is in relationship to him. He keeps saying that this is my sister. And he does it obviously because he doesn't want these kings or rulers to kill him. He thinks that, and obviously this was something that was kind of probably somewhat common, where people killed people to get a woman. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it sounds like our world, right? I mean, I grew up, you beat people up, right? You get in fights. How many people get in fights over a woman? How many movies are about people getting in fights about women? Yeah, so the Bible is not, again, it's not a book of fairy tales like I used to think. It's really rooted in reality, that actually our movies and everything are parodies of the Bible, are parrots of the Bible. It's literally just saying already what is in the Bible. It's just putting it into a fictional story. But here's the real deal, is that this is something that goes on within us. Jealousy, fear of being alone, fear of what ifs, all that. But that night God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, "You are dead, a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married." But Abimelech had not slept with her yet. So he said, and that's specific in this event, that, hey, she wasn't, he didn't breach, right? He didn't go beyond. And it says, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Didn't Abraham tell me she is my sister? And she herself said, yes, he is my brother. I acted in complete innocence. My hands are clean. So Abimelech has this encounter with God. And it's interesting. It says in a dream. So that's kind of interesting to see how in the Bible, again, God relates to people and speaks to people. And this one is in a dream that this happens. So that's kind of interesting. There are dreams that we see that the Lord does speak in. And so we don't want to, say no to people who say, hey, the Lord spoke to me in a dream. We just got to test it and see if it's something that really, is in agreement with the revelation of God in the scriptures. But I also see that as Abraham does this lying, this is something that Sarah picked up on and went along with. And unfortunately, you see an Adam and Eve kind of connection here, right? That just as Adam and Eve, didn't do the right things, and instead of, Adam saying to Eve, hey, listen, why did you do that? I'm not going to do that. Adam went right along with his wife. And here we see the wife going right along with the husband. And sometimes we just fall into patterns as husband and wife that are not very beneficial and very sinful. And this is a pattern, obviously, that's been in Abraham and Sarah's life. Something that, you see that this is a repetitive area. It makes us also just realize that we all have some repetitive areas, don't we? In the dream, God responded, yes, I know you are innocent. That's why I kept you from sinning against me and why I did not let you touch her. Now return the woman to her husband, and he will pay for you, and he will pray for you, for he is a prophet. Okay, so Abraham is called a prophet. I think this is maybe the first mention of prophet in the Bible. Someone who is, foretells the future, someone who speaks for God. Those are a couple definitions of prophet. And so he says, hey, the Lord says, this is my prophet, my spokesperson. And it says, then you will live. But if you don't return her to him, you can be sure that you and all your people will die. When someone says they're a prophet today, you got, I would just say, man, okay, well then, let's see. If you're the spokesperson for the Almighty, I would imagine, it's going to be pretty good. I think too many people use that term that I'm a prophet, and they don't quite, they don't meet the qualifications really. They don't really have the life that really backs up that title. And, but it says, you will live. So there's this dialogue between Abimelech. Now, Abimelech's not quite the believer, you could say, but isn't it interesting how there's this dialogue? It makes me think, too, that, hey, God will reach people. God will touch people. God will touch all kinds of people. What about that person out in the middle of the Amazon forest, Beau? Well, God speaks to Abimelech in a dream. I can imagine God could touch many people in dreams. So, you know what? We get already in the Bible that God's able to reach all people. And he does it primarily through the sharing of the gospel, through mission work, right? The idea of being sent out, where we get the term apostle, right? The idea of that. And then it's the idea of God can reach people in other facets. And so that's the answer to that question. So if you've ever, again, if you just read the Bible, you kind of see that it answers it. That's what God does. God can speak to people in many different ways. In a dream, In the dream, God responded, I know you're innocent. Isn't that cool? So Abimelech, verse 8, got up early the next morning and quickly called all of his servants together. And when he told them what had happened, his men were terrified. Then Abimelech called for Abraham. What have you done to us? He demanded. What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing? Wow. Abraham's getting rebuked by Abimelech. Isn't that cool? Have you ever been rebuked by a non-believer? By someone who's not in? Now, Abimelech has a good idea of sin and what that means and, who the true and living God is by this time. And maybe Abimelech's had a conversion at this point. I don't know. But you could see that his kingdom and his government seems to be up on, the things of God, of the true and living God. And again, this makes sense. Everybody's from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. There is a remnant of the true and living God, there's a remembrance of the true and living God in the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And as time goes on, things will get distorted, more distorted, convoluted, downright off, But it says, Abraham replied, I thought this is a godless place. They will want my wife and will kill me and get her. So he's presuming. He's presuming that everybody's out to get him. Isn't that crazy? How sometimes we presume people are out to get us when they're not out to get us. Just be nice. Just do the right thing. Just be kind. But instead we project, right? We're projecting all of our fears, all of our insecurities, all of the things that we went through in the past. And it's easy to do, man, especially when you go through a lot of violence. I remember as a kid seeing this dude in a fight. And he was like one of my neighbors, but he was in a fist fight. And a guy punched him in the face and took a beer can, literally ripped the beer can and punched him in the face with the can. And I was like, I was in kindergarten, and I remember it ripped his lip, it ripped his face, it ripped his lips, and he was just bleeding profusely. And I remember being a kid, just, man, like, whoa, like watching this dude in agony bleeding after getting punched in the face with this broken can. I mean, think of, man, how that ripped his skin. And I can remember that to this day. I mean, dude, I was like blown away by that. I mean, talk about a traumatic experience as a kid. And I had many, many, many situations like that, as a kid. And that kind of, tweaked me in many, I think, facets. It made me scared and fearful and insecure and having to cover up that insecurity. And no doubt that's why I went to drugs so early and drinking. But notice Abraham's got that. He's got that, hey, man, I was kind of scared. This was a godless place, and you guys are going to take my wife up. Man, God, help us to deal with those inner things, right? And it says, and I marry, and she is... I thought this was a godly place, that they will want my wife and they will want to kill me to get her. And she really is my sister, for we both have the same father, but different mothers. And I married her. So, hey, I'm not telling a full lie, just telling kind of a half truth, kind of thing. And when God called me to leave my father's home and to travel from place to place, I told her, do me a favor wherever we go. Tell the people that I am your brother. And so this is a dialogue between Abraham and Sarah. And it shouldn't blow you away that they're somewhat related, of course. They have a close relation. Many people today even have close relationships. We tend to be a little taken back by that, but we live in the United States, and that's you got to understand, we are not from here. Most of us are not from here. We have traveled over an ocean to get here. And so there's a distance between us and our ancestors. But that's not the case with many people on the planet. Ever since, Adam and Eve and Shem, Ham and Japheth and Noah. And so, that shouldn't shock you. And so anyway, but we see that great dialogue between Abraham saying, giving us the insight into his marriage. Hey, me and Sarah talk about this all the time. And I tell her like, hey, yeah, you should probably just be called my sister. That way it's safe and I don't have to fear dying and and you can get taken and But it seems to blow up in his face, right? I mean, the two events that we're told about in the book of Genesis, I mean, it doesn't really work out the way Abraham thinks it's going to work out, right? The lie. So it says Abimelech took some of the sheep and goats and cattle and male and female servants, and he presented them to Abraham. He also returned his wife, Sarah, to him. And Abimelech said, look over my land and choose any place where you would like to live. And he said to Sarah, look, I am giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver in the presence of all these witnesses. This is to compensate you for any wrong that I may have done to you. This will settle any claim against me, and your reputation is cleared. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants so they could have children. For the Lord had caused all the women to be infertile because of what had happened with Abraham's wife, Sarah. So there was other issues going on. What is the deal with so much infertility in our place? Abimelech carries that there's something going wrong. And then it gets blown up that, I see what, we're going to see this in the book of Judges, this kind of same idea, where in the book of Judges, it's Israel's going to wage war, but they can't win the war. Why? Because, they've been rebellious, or especially one clan or one specific family and one specific person. Really, instead of obeying the Lord, he chooses to rebel. And so they can't win the war, right? And it's kind of that kind of idea of like, hey, we're not going to be able to have any children if we don't figure out what's going on. And what's going on is something spiritual that's happening. And there's this issue going on with God and God's prophet, and it needs to be dealt with before we can move forward. And that's a kind of a cool idea too, right? In order to move forward, God has to deal with those issues that are going on. The issues with, and God will deal with his pastors. He will deal with his leaders. He will deal with those in leadership. God is the one who knows the hearts, and Jesus is our chief shepherd, our chief pastor. And Jesus is the one who walks in the midst of the church, the Bible says. And he knows his flocks oh so well. And so you see this pattern that God doesn't just keep things moving forward. Things sometimes come to a stop. And then things need to get dealt with, and then we go forward. Kind of cool, right? And so I need to be okay today with just, hey, God, deal with what needs to be dealt with so we can move forward. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. I love that. God kept his word. Man, that's a cool thing to remember today. He'll keep his word to you too. And it says, he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. He will complete that work. And she became pregnant. She gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. And this happened as just at just the time God had said it would. And Abraham named the son Isaac. Remember, God already gave him the name. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. Remember the covenant of circumcision. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about it will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son at his old age. So Sarah laughs. She laughed before when she heard about this, the promise that she was going to have a child. She was blown away, and she says, everybody's going to laugh. Of course they're going to laugh. I mean, man, wouldn't you be a little, let's face it, if we were at church, right, and some 100-year-old couple came up to us and the girl was pregnant, that would be a little strange, right? We'd be all, whoa, many reasons why we would be laughing, I'm sure. And it says, when Isaac grew up, he was about to be weaned. Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar, making fun of her son Isaac. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, Get rid of that slave woman and her son. He is not going to share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it. You see issues, jealousies, right? Child jealousies. My son's better than your son. Why are you laughing at my son? Yeah, my son might be a little quirky. Yeah, maybe he's a little autistic or something. Maybe he's got some OCD, whatever you call it today. Right? Maybe he's just a little strange. Kind of an interesting kid, right? And he's funny. You could see how this happens all the time in our world too, right? Moms get jealous, children of their children, and moms brawl other moms. And, think of how many of us talk about other people's kids in negative ways, right? You talk about another person's children, but you don't talk about them in positive ways. You talk about them in negative ways. Yeah, I would imagine you might see a little bit of the Sarah and Hagar syndrome in you too. That you got that. Instead of maybe them, saying, hey, you know what? Let's lift one another up. Let's help one another. Let's encourage one another. Instead, there's a tear down. There's a jealousy, right? Every time Sarah looks at Hagar, she thinks of her husband with her, and it bothers her, and so she's going to use the promise as like a that God has given her, that it's going to be through Isaac, as kind of a weapon against Hagar and Ishmael. Not good. Using our promise, using our the grace of God in our life as a weapon against other people. You don't think that happens in Christianity? Where people use their Christianity, oh, I love Jesus so much. Oh, I'm so filled with love. And then they have no love for people. They don't know how to love their enemies. They don't know how to be kind to people. They don't know how to lift one another up. They don't know how to be patient and long-suffering. They don't know how to bear with one another. They don't have that wisdom that is from above, that's peaceable and patient and willing to yield, filled with wisdom. They don't have any of that. There's just contention, strife. But they say, oh, I'm so blessed. I'm so, God is so on my side. But yet there's no Jesus fruit. What's the fruit? Love. Love your neighbor. Love God. Love your enemy. And so don't just say, we shouldn't just say that, oh yeah, I'm real close to God. Just do it. Just live it. This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son, but God told Abraham, do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Another reiteration, by the way, that it's going to be through Isaac, not through Ishmael. This is repetitive over and over and over and over. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too. So Ishmael's descendants will be a large nation as well. So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. And when the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. I don't want to watch the boy die, she said, and she burst into tears. But God heard the boy's crying. And the angel of God, very interesting person, by the way, called to Hagar from heaven, Hagar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. So this is a call from heaven, the angel of God calling from heaven. It's a neat study. Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make him a great nation from his descendants. So Ishmael will have a multitude of people, will become a great nation. Actually, I was just reading about Israel, the prime minister of Israel today, meeting with the Arab governments. That is interesting, right? That's kind of interesting. The Ishmael, Abraham hanging out. Two different nations. One of them would receive the land of Canaan. This is through the this is through the child called Isaac. That would be the land what we call today Israel. It's actually more than what's today, but it would be that land through Isaac. The other nation would be the Arab nations, and we see that there's a lot of those as well. How many? Quite a bit. You might want to figure that out yourself, but there's quite a bit. Okay, so, but they are not to live in the land of Canaan. That is supposed to be the descendants of Isaac. That's kind of what it's getting at. Okay, so then God opened Hagar's eyes. Ooh, that's cool. I hope God opens my eyes, right? We sing some songs like that, don't we? Open our eyes. And he saw a well full of water. Or she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. God opened her eyes and there was water. God opens our eyes and there's Jesus, right? The fountain of living water. He opens our eyes and we see the Lord. Man, we get the living water. So true. A woman at the well. Do you guys recall that? Hagar, well, boy, woman at the well. With water, with the living water, Jesus. Very cool. Very neat, right? The similarities. And God was with the boy, and as he grew up in the wilderness, she became a skillful archer. And he settled in the wilderness of Paran. His mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt, where she was from. And it says, about this time Abimelech came with Pishkol, his army commander, to visit Abraham. God is obviously with you, helping you in everything you do. Yeah, that's right. He's a prophet. And Abimelech said, swear to me in God's name that you will never deceive me, my children, or any of my descendants. I have been loyal to you, and now swear that you will be loyal to me and to this country where you are living as a foreigner. Remember, Abraham is living there as a foreigner in the land, protected by Abimelech, and Abimelech's thankful for Abraham and kind of the dealing with the issue of Abraham and Sarah. Remember, the promise was going to come through Sarah. This was an important time. That the baby was going to come through Sarah. So, hey, no one was supposed to get in the way of that, so to speak, right? What God has joined together, let not man separate. Not even Abimelech was supposed to get in the middle of that. And Abimelech realizes just how vital of a situation it was when Abraham lied. And so now Abimelech says, hey, let me, you're here in my land, but pledge a loyalty to me. And Abraham replied, yes, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had taken by force from Abraham's servants. This is the first I've ever heard of it, Abimelech answered. I have no idea who is responsible. You have never complained about this before. Abraham then gave some of his sheep, goats, and cattle to Abimelech. So they seem to be swapping gifts at times. And they made a treaty. But Abraham also took 7 additional female lambs and set them off by themselves. Abimelech asked, why have you set these 7 apart from the others? And Abraham replied, please accept these 7 lambs to show your agreement that I dug this well. Then he named the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because that was where he had sworn the oath. So Abraham wants to make it very clear that that well is his well. It was something that he dug, and he shows that by giving, in a sense, Abimelech like a tip, like, hey, here's the payment for kind of our covenant together, showing that we are, in agreement. But hey, here's a tip, man. And I have, I built this well. Here's a gift. After making the covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech left with Pishkol, the commander of his army, and they returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, And there he worshipped the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham lived as a foreigner in Philistine country for a long time. Okay, so Abraham is in the land of the Philistines. And he's there, and he has a treaty with Abimelech that they're not going to go to war together. Abimelech is thankful for his relationship with Abraham, but Abraham's a wealthy guy, and he's kind of a businessman as well, and there's been some issues. And so they've had to deal with those issues, and they dealt with it through a covenant. And Abraham also gives him that tip just to say, hey, I have dug this well, and man, I don't have any, in a sense, fight with you. And what a intense situation, a military situation as well. Abimelech's there with his commanding officer. I mean, not easy. Definitely times, man, we are in situations that are kind of heated. Why have you done this? Why have you done that? And it's like, I didn't do that. Notice sometimes there's people that accuse us when we really didn't do anything. People demand something from you, and you really don't even know what they're talking about. And that happens at times. And we just got to kind of listen and be patient, try to work it out the best we can. But especially with a right heart and a good attitude, those will go a long way. Do you have a good attitude? Do you have a good heart? When things aren't going well and there's difficulty and it could be a contentious situation, do you automatically just make it a contentious situation because you're angry and you have this stuff in your heart that hasn't been dealt with yet, so it just keeps coming out, and it comes out in anger and bitterness and da-da-da-da? Or are you able to pull back and realize that, hey, this guy's not my enemy. I don't have to fight him. There's a way that we can make peace. Isn't it nice, even on a global scale, when politicians can make some kind of peace? They can sit down and deal with things instead of resorting to the fight. It's nice when things can get dealt with properly in a better way, right? Where people don't have to die. This unfortunately is not the case in a lot of situations. And many people die at the hands of the negotiators, right? The politicians. Here, Abraham, Abimelech going at it. But the commander of the army knows that, hey, he's at the whim of whatever Abimelech's going to go, where he's going to go. Abimelech might say, hey, we're going to fight you. And then the commander of the army is going to have to get his army and, figure out how to fight Abraham and his mighty men. I mean, you can see how crazy it gets and how relevant it is to our world, how our world struggles with that idea of forgiveness. And we have a struggle, too, when it comes to not resorting to fighting. We tend to like the fight in many ways. So, okay, those are the two chapters that I wanted to go over today in my devotion and just think through them a little bit. And they're two cool chapters. One of them certainly shows that we are humans that have repetitive sinful issues. And we can develop those sinful issues even in a marital relationship. And you might think your marital relationship's great, but really there's a lot of dysfunction within it. And that's true of all of us somewhat. And we have to kind of look at it. And, and God wants us to move forward. But in order to move forward, we do have to deal with some of those things. If you're not at peace, why aren't you at peace? Why can't you be content? Why can't you just be good with what you have or where you're at? Or do you always want more? Do you say I don't want more, I don't want more, but you spend a ton of money? There's all kinds of things that go on in a marriage that, man, really, God wants us to move forward, and he wants us to deal with things in honest ways. So, and then we have the next chapter, right, where we see that there's the birth of Isaac. Finally, we see a promised child on the scene. Hey, is this the promised child that's going to defeat the enemy, Satan? Is that who this is? We've been waiting for a child to be born forever. We know it's going to come through, right? Salvation is going to come through Isaac. If it's not Isaac, then who is it? We're waiting. But we know it's going to be a child. So, absolutely. Okay, So that's the end of this. So you see the themes of the Bible, right? Already you see it very early on. There's going to be a special child that's going to be born. This child's going to be interesting, that God can reside on the planet in the flesh. He can walk around, all this stuff like this. And yet there's other ways God speaks to people as well, in dreams, that God is very much in touch with not just Abraham, but he's also able to get a hold of Abimelech. And God's working in a vast amount of ways all over the place at the same time. Wow, we get some amazing concepts already in the Bible. And hopefully you're already getting it, right? You're already going, whoa, child born? That's interesting. Woman, it's going to come through a woman. But we see a lot about human nature as well. So cool stuff. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.